Hi, I'm Lou, and today I'm going to show you how to make this pottery wheel with a ceiling fan motor and a plastic bucket for about 50 bucks. Here are some of the major parts we'll need. A ceiling fan like this, a plastic 5-gallon bucket like this, a piece of 1/2-inch thick plywood that's big enough to fit 2 buckets on it side by side. If you can get treated plywood, that's great because we're going to get it wet. Otherwise you can just paint it. And a large plastic peanut butter jar. You also need a power cord. You can get this by cutting it off an old appliance that you're throwing away, or just buy a $2 extension cord and cut off the end. A few small pieces of scrap lumber and various screws and machine screws. Some electrical tape and a bunch of wire nuts. What we really need is the motor inside the fan. So what you're going to have to do is take off the lighting fixture, take off the fan blades, and then take off this decorative shell. There's 2 pieces. There's bolts that go into it all the way around. Take those off and it'll all come apart. And you'll end up with just the motor. Once you get the motor out of the fan, it should look like this. It has some power wires on this side and electronics on this side. And there's a connector here that holds it all together. And I just took a wire cutters and cut both sides and took that connector out, because we're going to have to pull these wires back through all onto this side. If you pull here, the power wires should come right through. Getting these wires pulled from here all the way through to here is a bit tricky because they're anchored right here in the middle. What I'm going to do is take a piece of wire with a hook on the end and shove it through. And then on the other end I'll hook a piece of string, about 2-foot long string, and then pull it back through. And I've peeled these wires back a little bit and twisted them into a knob there. Now I'm going to take this string and form it into a noose and put it over the end of that knob. Now I'm going to use that to pull this wire back through to the other side. Now we need to reattach the electronics. Just line up all your wire colors. So there's a pink, strip that with the wire strippers, wind it together with the other pink, like this, and then put a wire knot on it to protect it. And you'll do that for all these other wires as well. Your white power wire gets connected to the white wire here, the black power wire gets connected to the black here, and the black and white can just be thrown away. That was for a light, which we're not using anymore. When you have it all wired back together, there should be no wires on this side of the motor, and all the electronics and the power wires on this side of the motor. If you're worried that the wiring is going to be too confusing for you, just take a picture of what it was like before we cut out the connector on that side, and it's just wired up the same over here with all the same colors. There's one peculiar thing about ceiling fan motors. They're almost inside out. A normal motor has the outside stationary and the inside spins, where in a ceiling fan motor the inside is stationary and the outside spins. So when you go to test your motor to make sure your wiring is correct, make sure you hold the inside, not the outside, or your wires will get all tangled up. It should look like this. Our pottery wheel is going to get bolted to the top of this motor, so this inner spindle is in the way and no longer needed since I pulled the wires through, so I'm just going to take a hacksaw and cut that off. It would be a really good idea to have a vacuum running while you do this so that none of the metal shavings get into the motor. You might use some sandpaper or a Dremel and take off that last little edge. Next we're going to make the pottery wheel and a round support for inside the bucket. So take your bucket and put it on your board and trace out 2 big circles. Now cut these 2 circles out with a handsaw, hacksaw, or any appropriate power tool. Now we need to find the centers of our circles. So tape 2 pieces of paper together and put the bucket on it and trace it. And cut out your traced circle. Now fold your paper circle exactly in half and in half again. When you unfold it, That spot right there is going to be the center of the circle. So lay it on top of your board and tap a nail right there to mark it. Pick your nicer wood circle and save it as the pottery wheel. The second one we'll use as a motor support. My motor looks like this, and the way I'm going to attach it is to take this off and bolt this plate directly to this. Here's a slightly different style fan motor, and kind of the same thing applies. I would have to cut a hole for this to fit in there and then bolt this wooden plate onto this mount. First I'll take this metal plate off by unscrewing this nut. Then I'll unscrew the plate itself from the motor. Now I'll drill a 3/4 inch hole in my plate. Now I'm going to drill 4 holes in this plate for these screws to go through. Looks like one's already started there for me. I want to bolt this metal plate on here, but these tabs are in the way, so I'm going to cut them off. Now I can put my wooden support plate on the motor and put the metal disc back on. Now I'll put a screw in this hole and lift up the plate and screw it in. And then put the rest of the screws in too. Although these screws aren't going to be exposed, it's probably a good idea to cut off the sharp points just in case. Now my motor's bolted onto the support plate. Next I'm going to need to measure the distance between the actual spinning disc and the support plate down here. And in my case, that is a total of 5.5 inches from top to bottom. Now add a 1/2 inch to that distance. Since mine was 5.5, my total will be 6. And then mark in the bucket at 6 inches on 4 different spots that are about 90 degrees apart. Now take 4 scraps of wood like this, line up the top of each board with your line, and put screws in from the outside of the bucket to hold the boards in place. And your motor and support should lay in like this. Now we need to find the bolt holes. So take a piece of paper and lay it on top of the motor and rub it with a pencil or a crayon. And you should be able to start seeing right there, for instance, 2 bolt holes. You want all the bolt holes in the center. Find the center of your pattern and stick a nail through it, and then put that nail in the center of your wooden wheel. Give it a tap to make sure it stays in place. Each fan blade on the motor had 2 mounting holes, but we're only going to use 1 of those in each position. So just go around the circle right in the center and tap each one of these to make a mark on the wood plate. Now you can take your pattern off. You'll probably have to make a special trip to the hardware store to get these screws and take your fan motor with you so you can make sure they fit. But you want some screws that'll fit in here and have a flat head like this, and also make them be stainless. Both of my fan motors take 1/4 by 20 by 3/4, so probably that's what yours will too. Now using a drill bit that's slightly larger than your screw, in my case this is a 1/4 inch bit, drill all 5 holes around the outside of your wheel. Now take a slightly larger bit that'll match the flare of the screw and drill in just a little bit to countersink it. Now put in your wheel, line it up with the screw holes, and screw it in. Tighten the screws down until they're just flush with the surface of the wood. Now we need to connect the electronics back up. So pull the wheel out and flip it over. We want to mount this peanut butter jar lid right here, so we're going to have to cut a hole in here to fit that, and we can just do that with a knife. I've got 2 holes here, so I'll put this on and then screw in through the plastic into those holes to hold it down. Connect all the electronics back in. All these electronics are going to get captured inside this peanut butter jar, and this pull chain is going to stick out the side. So we need to drill a 3/8 inch hole right here in the side of the peanut butter jar. And stick the pull chain mechanism through. Using a drill bit that's about the same size as your power cord, Drill a hole in the side of the bucket about 5 inches up and right next to one of the wood supports we put in earlier. And feed your power cord in through that hole. Pull it all the way through so we have plenty of slack to work with. Using the same drill bit, drill a hole right in the bottom center of your peanut butter jar. And stick your power cord in there. Finally, connect the power cord to your loose black and white wires. You'll notice that one side of the power cord has a slight white line on it. That's the one that goes to the white side. And the black goes to the black, and of course, wire nuts as usual. Now stuff all your electronics and wires into your peanut butter jar and pull the slack out of the power cord and screw it onto the lid. Now measure down from the top wheel all the way to your switch, which in my case is about 8 inches. On the opposite side of the bucket where the power cord comes in, I want to drill another hole up front here to be 1 inch more than the last thing we measured. So that in our case would be 9 inches. And drill it again fairly close to the board in there. This hole only has to be big enough for a string to go through, so I just used an 1/8 inch bit. Tie a piece of string to the pull chain about 2 feet in length. Feed the string through that little hole. You might want to tie a small washer or nut on the end of your string so you don't accidentally pull it through. Unscrew your top plate and take it off. Note where your pull chain comes out underneath here and mark a spot on top of the board that represents that. Now set the whole thing down inside your bucket. Make sure you're not sitting on top of any cords on the way down. Also make sure your pull cord is lined up with that line that we just drew on the board. Now screw your bottom board into the 4 wooden supports on the side. Screw your top wheel back on. Pull your power cord out from the bucket. Plug it in, pull your pull chain, and your wheel should start right up. With it running, you might want to draw a few circles on here so you'll know where to center your clay. Let's see how this works. Well, I'm not a very good potter, but you get the idea. Thank you for watching, and good luck making your pottery wheel.